Some memories come walking back soft as dust in evening light, and some come sharp enough to cut a man's hand years after the blade is gone. Folks like to say a family is born from blood, a name, a wedding vow, or a cradle beside a mother's bed. But out on the Nebraska prairie, where hunger could empty a house faster than death, a family was sometimes made from one angry choice in the middle of a crowd. And sometimes the Lord sent the quietest man in the county to do the thing everyone else was too ashamed to do. In the spring of 1882, Dawson Boone came striding across the packed dirt street of Bellwether, Nebraska, with his black coat snapping in the wind and a feed sack clenched in one fist. He had only meant to buy oats. He had only meant to get back to his ranch before the sky turned mean. Then he heard the baby crying. The sound came from the auction steps beside Grady's Mercantile, thin as a torn ribbon and sharp enough to stop every wagon wheel in town. A boy no older than 8 stood on the crate where men usually sold harness, hens, and broken plows. His face was sunburned and hollow. He held a flour sack to his chest, and inside it, wrapped in a faded blue quilt, a baby girl whimpered with feverish little breaths. Beside them stood their older brother, Silas Bell, 17 and hard-eyed from fear, pretending to be anger. He held up a dented silver spoon like it was proof the children had once belonged to a real home. $5 for the boy, Silas called, his voice cracking. No, 2 more for the baby. I can't feed him. I won't watch him starve, a woman gasped. A man laughed once, then coughed into his hand as if ashamed of the sound. The little boy tightened his arms around the baby. My name ain't Boy, he said. It's Abel. Nobody answered him. Across the street, Coraline Sawyer stood frozen with a basket of mending on her hip. A needle was tucked into the cuff of her sleeve, and a strip of green calico fluttered from the basket like a flag, too tired to fly. She had come into town to deliver shirts she had patched for the hotel men. She had not expected to see children priced beside sacks of seed. The baby coughed, a wet, helpless sound. Coraline moved before she knew she had moved. Dawson moved too. They reached the steps at the same time, both of them cutting through the circle of townsfolk. Dawson's jaw was clenched so tight the muscle jumped beneath his beard. Coraline saw his eyes first, gray as a rain-filled creek, and angry in a way that made people step back. Silas saw him and lifted his chin. You buying or preaching, Boone? Dawson looked at the boy, then at the baby. His voice came low. What's her name? Abel answered before Silas could. Nellie. She don't like loud sounds, the baby cried again, as if proving him right. Before we go further, tell me where you're watching from tonight. If this story touches your heart, give it a like, share it with someone who loves frontier tales, and subscribe so you can come back for the next one. Now let's return to Bellwether, where one choice was about to change a whole county. Dawson reached into his coat and pulled out a folded banknote. He did not hand it to Silas at first. He held it like something dirty. How much debt did your mother leave at Grady's? He asked. Silas' mouth opened and shut. He glanced toward the mercantile window, where Ezra Grady stood watching through the glass, with his tunes hooked in his vest. That ain't your concern. It is if you're selling children on his steps. The crowd shifted. Nobody wanted the truth said plain, but Dawson Boone had never been a man who cared for making a lie comfortable. Grady came out, smoothing his vest. Now, Dawson, no need to make a spectacle. The bellboy owes for flour, quinine, lamp oil, and a burial plank for his mother. He made his own decision. Coraline looked at Abel's bare feet, white with dust at the toes, and at Nellie's cheeks flushed under the quilt. A child does not pay for a coffin. Grady's eyes moved over her plain brown dress, her work-rough hands, the mending basket. Mrs. Sawyer, charity is welcome after accounts are settled. I am not Mrs. Sawyer to you when you want me quiet, she said. A murmur slipped through the women gathered near the hitching posts. Caroline felt their eyes. Widow Sawyer, they still called her when they meant poor. Widow Sawyer when they meant used up. Widow Sawyer when they remembered she had buried a husband and a baby in the same winter and had not smiled easy since. Dawson unfolded the note. "I'm paying the store debt," he said, "not buying flesh." Silas stared at the money. His throat worked. Dawson held the note out to Coraline instead of Grady. "Count it." That surprised the town more than the money did. Coraline took it because Abel was watching her as if grown people were a weather pattern he had learned to fear. She smoothed the note against her basket and counted with steady fingers. $20, she said. Grady's face changed. That was more than the debt. Dawson looked at him. "You'll write paid in full for flour, medicine, burial, and any shame you thought to collect interest on?" Grady flushed. "Mind your tone. Mind your ledger." Silas reached for the note. Dawson closed his fist around it. "You don't get paid for abandoning blood," he said. Silas' eyes flashed. "You don't know anything. I know hunger makes cowards of some men." Silas flinched as if struck. For one breath Coraline saw the boy beneath the anger. Thin, frightened, 17 with a dead mother, and 2 children clinging to him like stones in a flood. Then his face hardened again. "I'm leaving for Cheyenne," he muttered. "Railroad work. There ain't nothing for me here." "There was Abel," Coraline said. "There was Nellie." Silas looked at the baby once, and whatever moved in him did not win. "They'll die with me." Abel's chin trembled, but he did not cry. He only whispered into the quilt, "Don't listen, Nell. Don't listen." Dawson stepped up onto the crate. The boards groaned under his weight. He took off his black coat and wrapped it around Abel and the baby both, covering them from the crowd. Then he turned to the town. "These children are under my protection until a proper home is settled." The sheriff, Amos Pike, cleared his throat. "Dawson, that ain't exactly legal. Fen make it legal. It ain't so simple." Dawson's eyes went colder. "Children being sold was simple enough for all of you to stand around and watch." No one answered that. Coraline climbed the first step and put her hand against Nellie's forehead. "The baby's skin burned. She needs a bed and mustard cloth. My baby willow bark if the fever climbs." Dawson looked at her. "Can you tend her?" "I can. Come with me." The words sounded like a command, because Dawson Boone did not know how to make a plea. Coraline stiffened. "I am not one of your hired hands." His face shifted, just barely. "No. You're the only person here who touched her like she mattered." That silenced Coraline more than a softer sentence might have. Abel looked from one to the other. "You ain't taking Nellie away from me." "No," Coraline said at once. Dawson stepped down, lifted Abel carefully from the crate, and set him on the ground without loosening the boy's hold on his sister. Abel stared up at him. "I can walk. I know I eat little. I know that too." Dawson picked up the dentist's silver spoon from the crate and held it out. Abel hesitated, then took it and tucked it into the flour sack beside the quilt. "What is it?" Dawson asked. "Mama's sugar spoon," Abel said. "She let Nell gum it when her teeth hurt." Dawson nodded as if the spoon were a deed to land. Grady, red-faced, wrote the receipt in a tight hand. Dawson made him write every line while the whole town watched. "Paid in full. No remaining claim. No debt upon Abel Bell or Nellie Bell." Then Dawson folded the paper and gave it to Caroline. She raised an eyebrow. "You keep things safe," he said. It was not praise exactly, but it came near enough to make her look away. They put the children in Dawson's wagon. Abel refused to sit unless Nellie lay across his lap. Coraline climbed beside him and held the baby's head steady when the wagon jolted. Dawson walked around to the front, then paused. Silas stood alone by the empty crate. For a moment, the 2 brothers by blood and the man by choice faced each other across the dirt. Silas spat near the wheel. "You're tired of 'em." Dawson's answer was quiet. "My baby, but not before supper." It was a small sentence, almost nothing. Yet Abel bent his head over Nellie and shut his eyes, as if supper was a promise big enough to rest under. The Boone Ranch lay 6 miles west, where the prairie opened wide and lonely. Dawson drove with both hands tight on the reins. He did not talk. Coraline did not either. The wagon wheels clicked over ruts. Wind pushed through last year's grass. Somewhere far off, a meadowlark sang like it had never known hunger. Abel watched everything. He watched Dawson's shoulders. He watched Coraline's hands. He watched the road behind them until Bellwether dipped out of sight. "Is there a lock on your door?" he asked. Dawson glanced back. "Is. Does it lock from inside?" "Is." Abel nodded, satisfied by that more than by any kindness. Nellie whimpered. Coraline shifted the quilt and saw the baby's little fist curled around nothing, searching. "When did she last eat?" Abel's face pinched. "This morning. I chewed bread soft for her. She don't like beans unless they're mashed." Coraline looked at Dawson. "Have you milk?" "1 cow fresh enough, and eggs. Hens, when they feel generous, well need broth. I've got salt pork. She needs better than salt pork." Dawson's mouth tightened, but he only said, "Then tell me what to fetch from the smokehouse." That was the first thing Coraline noticed about him that did not match his anger. He did not argue when a child's need was plain. His house came into view near sundown, a low timber place with a sod windbreak and a barn leaning a little to the east. It was not a poor ranch, but it was a silent one. No curtains in the windows, no wash on the line, no flowers near the porch. A broken rocking chair lay on its side by the steps, gray with weather. A dog with 1 torn ear rose from the shade and gave a single bark. "Stay, Judge," Dawson said. The dog thumped his tail once, then sniffed the air toward the children and whined. Inside, the house smelled of coffee, leather, cold ash, and old loneliness. Coraline saw 2 tin plates on a shelf, 1 chair pushed under the table, 1 beside the coal stove. A rifle hung above the door. A Bible sat on the mantel with dust along its spine. There was a woman's blue shawl folded on the back of a chair, untouched by use, but not forgotten. Coraline noticed it. Dawson noticed her noticing it. "My mother's," he said, "nothing more." She nodded and carried Nellie toward the stove. Abel followed so close he bumped into her skirt. "Don't put her down. I have to warm milk. I'll hold her. You're shaking." And his knees told the truth. Coraline knelt so her face was level with his. "Abel, I need both hands to help your sister. You can stand right beside her. Put your hand on her quilt. That way she knows you're here." He studied her, deciding if this was trickery. Then he placed 2 dirty fingers on the edge of the blue quilt. Dawson brought wood without being asked. He moved awkwardly in his own kitchen, as if the presence of a woman and children had made every familiar thing foreign. He struck a match. Coraline set milk in a small pot, cut bread into crumbs, and asked for a clean cloth. Dawson opened a drawer and found none. Coraline looked at him. He said, "I use feed sacks for a baby." His jaw worked. "I wasn't expecting one." She could have scolded him. Instead, she reached into her basket and drew out the green calico strip she had meant to use on a hotel curtain. She tore it into smaller pieces. Abel flinched at the sound. Coraline softened her hands. "Just cloth. Mama tore sheets when Nellie came early," he whispered. "She said the world was always taking whole things and making little things of them." Dawson stood still by the stove, holding a stick of wood he had forgotten to lay on the fire. Coraline dipped the cloth in warm water and cleaned Nellie's face. The baby quieted when milk touched her lips, though she drank weakly. Abel watched every swallow. When Nellie slept, finally, Coraline made Abel eat. He sat at Dawson's rough table, both hands around a tin cup of milk, eyeing the door. Dawson put beans, bread, and a fried egg before him. Abel stared at the egg. Dawson said, "Eat." Coraline gave him a look. Dawson tried again, gruffer and lower. "It's yours." Abel picked it up with his fingers and took one bite, then another. Tears slid down his dirty cheeks, but he made no sound. Dawson turned away and busied himself at the stove. Coraline saw his hand grip the iron handle too hard. That night, arrangements had to be made. Coraline would not stay alone at Dawson Boo's ranch unless there was no other choice. And yet there was no other choice. Nellie was fevered. Abel would not leave her, and Bellwether had already shown what its charity was worth. Dawson hitched the wagon again after dark and drove to the nearest neighbor, Mrs. Hattie Pruitt, a widow of 60 with a back bent by work and a tongue sharp enough to cut rope. She came carrying a carpet bag and a lantern. "I'll sit in the parlor," Hattie announced when she entered. Dora, rifle loaded, reputation guarded, baby tended, everybody alive by morning if the Lord don't object. Dawson gave a stiff nod. "Thank you, don't tang me. Heat more water." Coraline almost smiled. For 3 days, Nellie's fever rose and fell like weather over the plains. Coraline slept in pieces, sitting in a chair beside the small bed Dawson dragged from the back room. Abel slept under it the first night, curled like a farm dog, his hand up through the slats to touch the quilt. When Coraline tried to coax him onto a pallet, he whispered, "Things get took when I sleep too far." So she made his pallet beside the bed and tied a strip of green calico from his wrist to the bedpost, loose enough not to bind, firm enough that he would feel if Nellie moved. The next morning he looked at the ribbon and said, "That's foolish," but he did not untie it. Dawson rose before dawn, milked the cow, fed the hens, watered horses, and came in smelling of frost and hay. He set coffee near Coraline without comment. The first morning it was black and bitter. The second, he set a chip cup beside it with a spoonful of sugar he must have found somewhere in town. The third, he remembered milk. Coraline noticed each change and said nothing. She worked as if she had always known that house. She scrubbed the cradle Dawson found in the loft, though there was a crack in one rocker. She boiled cloth. She made broth from a prairie hen Dawson shot before sunrise. She washed Abel's hair in a basin while he sat stiff as a fence post and held a knife Dawson had given him to clean. "You don't need that with me," she said. "I need it with everybody." She poured warm water gently over his scalp. "Then keep it pointed at the floor." He thought about that. "All right." The baby's fever broke on the 4th morning just as the first yellow light touched the windows. Nellie opened her eyes, looked at Abel, and made a soft bubbling sound. Abel burst into tears. He tried to hide it by bending over her, but his small shoulders shook. Coraline rested her hand between them. Dawson stood in the doorway with a pail of milk and looked as if someone had struck him in the chest. "She knows me," Abel said. Coraline's voice was thick. "Of course she does." Dawson set the pail down and went outside without removing his hat. Coraline found him later by the corral, one hand on the top rail, staring toward the prairie. "Shall live," Coraline said. He nodded. "You paid more than the debt?" He nodded again. "Why?" The wind moved along the grass. Dawson's face stayed turned away. "I had a younger sister once, that was all." Coraline waited because grief sometimes needed a quiet room around it, even outdoors. At last he added, Ada. She was 5, I was 12. Our father drank through a winter. Mother died in January. Ada cried at night from hunger. I went to a neighbor for help, but he said Boone trouble was Boone trouble. By the time the church women came, she was gone. Coraline held the top rail beside him. "I'm sorry." His mouth tightened. "Sorry don't feed a child." "No," she said. "But sometimes it keeps a man from turning to stone." He looked at her then. It was the longest he had ever looked. "Did it keep you?" She almost stepped back. Nobody asked her that. They spoke around her widowhood like it was a broken chair left in a corner. "My husband, Peter, died of lung fever," she said. "Our son died 3 days later. He was 10 months old. I kept his little shoe in my sewing trunk for a year, then hated myself for keeping it. then hated myself for putting it away. Dawson lowered his eyes. What was his name? Samuel? The name came out small but whole. Dawson nodded once, not with pity, but with respect. Samuel Sawyer. It had been so long since anyone had said her baby's full name that Coraline had to grip the rail. Inside the house, Abel called, "Miss Coraline?" Nellie's chewing the spoon. Coraline wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand before she turned. Coming. Dawson remained by the corral a moment longer. When he came in, he repaired the cradle rocker before supper. Word traveled faster than mercy in Bellwether. By Sunday, the county had made a story of it. Dawson Boone had bought 2 children. Dawson Boone had taken Widow Sawyer into his house. Dawson Boone had finally gone mad out there alone on his wind-beaten ranch. Coraline heard the whispers when she brought Abel and Nellie to church 2 weeks later. She had washed Abel's shirt and patched the elbows with blue cloth. She had sewn Nellie a bonnet from the green calico that had first bound fever cloths and frightened hands. Dawson walked behind them, hat low, expression thunderous. Abel held Coraline's skirt with one hand and the dented spoon with the other. He carried it everywhere now, tucked into his pocket, until fear made him rub the handle smooth with his tongue. Inside the church, women turned their heads. Men measured Dawson. Silas Bell was gone, vanished toward the railroad, leaving behind debt, shame, and a rumor that he had done the only sensible thing. After service, Mrs. Tilda Morrow approached Coraline near the pump. She wore lavender gloves and a smile that did not warm her eyes. "Mrs. Sawyer, you are brave," she said, "though some might call it unwise, staying up there with Mr. Boone. Hattie Pruitt stayed too," Coraline said. "Not every night now, I hear. Hattie has goats with better manners than most people. She goes where she pleases." Tilda's smile pinched. "And the children, what is to become of them? Surely Mr. Boone cannot keep them like stray pup." Abel's hand tightened in Coraline's skirt. Dawson came up behind them. "No child of this house will be spoken of as a stray." Tilda paled up. "I meant no harm. Then practice meaning better." Coraline turned slightly. Dawson, his eyes flicked to her. At her low tone, something in him checked itself. He took one breath, then another. Sheriff Pike joined them, hat in hand. "There'll have to be a guardianship hearing. Judge Faulkner rides through next month." "Fine," Dawson said. "The county might place them elsewhere," Pike said carefully. "A widow alone, a bachelor rancher, no relation. Some folks are uneasy." "Were they uneasy at the auction?" Dawson asked. Pike looked down. Coraline stepped forward. "Sheriff, those children need steady meals, clean bedding, and people who will not sell them when flour runs low. Until the judge comes, they have that." Pike nodded. "I know it." Tilda's gaze swept Coraline's worn dress. "Love is noble, but children cost money." "So does gossip," Dawson said. "And yet folks spend plenty. That earned a few coughs that might have been hidden laughter." On the wagon ride home, Coraline was quiet. Abel fell asleep against her side, exhausted by church and stairs. Nellie slept in a basket at their feet, her bonnet slipping over one eye. Dawson finally said, "I spoke too sharp." "Ah, yes." He waited. "You defended them," Coraline said. "But one day Abel will need to learn. He can stand in town without a storm breaking over his head." Dawson looked at the reins. "I don't know how to be soft." "No one asked you to be soft, only careful." The wagon rolled on. After a while he said, "Will you teach me?" Coraline looked at him. His face stayed forward, but his ears had gone red beneath his hat brim. She did not smile, because it would have wounded his pride. "I'll try." Life settled, not easily, but with the slow stubbornness of bread rising near a stove. Coraline did not become mistress of Dawson's house in a day. She returned to town twice a week for sewing, with Hattie or Sheriff Pike's wife, sitting with the children when needed. Dawson paid her wages for nursing and housekeeping. and Coraline made him write it in a ledger so no one could call her Charity or kept woman. The ledger became their first honest thing. On Monday mornings, Dawson left coins under a blue chip cup. Coraline wrote what they bought: flour, lard, lamp oil, calico, sugar, quinine, shoe leather for Abel. If there was money left, she put it in a jar marked children. Dawson never touched it. Abel began following him around the ranch, silent at first. He learned to scatter feed for hens, but stood back when the rooster charged. He learned to carry kindling stacked high against his chest. He learned that Judge, the torn-eared dog, would sleep across the door without being told. But he did not trust the barn loft. He would not climb ladders. When Dawson asked why, Abel shrugged too hard. 3 days later, Coraline found him behind the smokehouse, breathing fast, his hands over his ears while Dawson repaired shingles overhead. "He ain't mad at you," she said gently. Abel's eyes were wide. Silas used to climb up and say he was leaving. He said if I cried, I'd jump just to make me sorry. Coraline's heart tightened. She waited until Dawson came down and told him quietly. He said nothing, but that evening, he took the ladder off the barn wall and laid it flat in the grass. "Step on it," he told Abel. Abel frowned. "It's on the ground." "That's right. That's stupid. Most brave things start stupid." Abel put one foot on the bottom rung, then another. Dawson walked beside him along the ladder, as if it were a bridge over a canyon. The next day, they leaned it against the fence. A week later, against the low shed. Nobody cheered. Nobody forced him. By summer, Abel climbed halfway up the barn ladder to hand Dawson nails, his mouth set with fear and pride. Nellie's habits were smaller but no less mighty. She hid bread in her fist even after she was full. She cried whenever a door slammed. She would not sleep unless Abel's hand touched the quilt. Coraline began leaving little pieces of bread on her tray at every meal, not to be eaten, but to remain there, proving nothing, disappeared, simply because a child closed her eyes. One night Dawson noticed. "She don't eat that piece," he said. "She needs to see it stay." The next morning, he set a heel of bread on the edge of Nellie's tray before Coraline could. Nellie patted it with her baby hand and smiled at him with 2 teeth. Dawson looked away quickly, as if smiles were dangerous. The ranch changed by inches. Coraline washed the windows. Abel straightened the woodpile because crooked stacks bothered him. Dawson fixed the porch step that had been loose for years. Hattie brought hollyhock seeds. Coraline planted them by the front fence with Abel digging holes too deep and Nellie sitting in the grass, waving the sugar spoon at chickens. The broken rocking chair was mended. The blue shawl came off the chair back one cool evening when Nellie coughed in her sleep. Dawson brought it to Coraline without speaking. "Are you sure?" she asked. He looked at the baby, then at the shawl. "Cloth ought to warm somebody." Coraline wrapped Nellie in it. Dawson sat by the stove until midnight, pretending to oil a harness buckle that had been oiled twice already. The quiet night conversation came in July, during a storm that split the sky white and shook the windows. Abel woke screaming when thunder cracked over the roof. He crawled under the table with Nellie clutched against him, though she had been asleep in the cradle. Coraline found them there, Abel's eyes wild. "Cellar," he gasped. "Mama said storms take roofs." Dawson crouched outside the table, but did not reach in. "The roof will hold," he said. "You don't know. I built it." Abel shook his head. "Men say things." Dawson absorbed that like a deserved blow. Then he stood, took a lantern, and opened the cellar door. "Then we'll sit where you feel safe." So they did. All 4 of them went below, with Hattie snoring upstairs in the parlor, because storms never troubled a woman who had survived 3 births, 2 blizzards, and 1 mule kick. The cellar smelled of potatoes, earth, and damp wood. Coraline sat on an upturned crate with Nellie in her lap. Abel leaned against a barrel, fighting sleep. Dawson sat on the bottom step, large shoulders nearly filling the stairwell. Lightning flashed through the cracks above. After a long while, Coraline said, What made you so angry, Dawson Boone? He gave a dry breath. You ask small questions. She smiled faintly in the lantern light. I mend small stitches. They hold better. He rubbed his thumb along a scar across his knuckle. My father died in a ditch outside Kearney, drunk. I spent years making sure no one could say I was like him. Worked hard, bought land, kept my mouth shut. But anger stayed. It was useful. Kept men from asking too much. Kept women from pitying me. Kept children away. Abel's eyes were closing, but he heard enough to murmur, didn't keep us. Dawson looked at him. No, he said, it didn't. Coraline looked down at Nellie, asleep with her mouth open against the blue shawl. My anger went the other direction, she said. I folded it, put it in drawers, stitched it into seams. When Samuel died, women told me God needed another angel. I wanted to break every plate in the church basement. Dawson's gaze lifted to hers. Did you? No, shame? A surprised laugh escaped her, soft and brief. It warmed the cellar better than the lantern. Dawson's mouth moved, almost a smile, then settled again. After the storm passed, Abel was asleep against the potato barrel. Dawson carried him upstairs. The boy woke halfway and stiffened. I forgot you, Dawson said. Abel's hand gripped his shirt. Don't sell Nellie. Dawson stopped on the stair. I want promise on something. Dawson looked around as if the dark cellar might offer him the right oath. Then he said, on my land. Abel considered that. A rancher promising on land meant more than promising on breath. All right, he whispered, and slept again. In August, the first outside blow came not from gossip, but from paper. A letter arrived from the county court. Judge Faulkner would hear the matter of Abel and Nellie Bell on the first Friday in September. Any citizen with knowledge of their circumstances could testify. Any suitable household could petition. Coraline read it at the table while Dawson stood by the stove. Suitable, he said. It is only a word. Words have teeth in a courthouse. He was right. The second letter came 2 days later, written in a slanted hand. Did not know. It was from Silas Bell in Cheyenne. I hear Boone paid money and Widow Sawyer plays mother. They are my blood. If there is money in keeping them, I will come claim what is mine. Coraline folded the letter slowly. Dawson took it from her hand and read it twice. His face did not change, but the room did. He won't get near them, he said. Not by force, Coraline replied, but by law. My bay. Dawson paced once, then stopped because Nellie startled at the sound of his boots. He lowered his voice. What do we do? We. Coraline heard it. She reached for the ledger. We prove care. Food, clothing, doctor visits, wages paid. Store debts cleared, schooling begun. We get Hattie, Sheriff Pike, Reverend Miles. Dawson stared at her as she made columns. You sound like a banker going to war. I have been poor long enough to know feelings do not win against paper. He sat. Coraline dipped the pen. And we decide what we are asking the judge. Dawson looked at the cradle. Nellie was asleep, one foot poked out from under the shawl. Abel sat by the door cleaning mud from Dawson's old boots, a chore he had given himself because polished boots seemed, in his mind, to belong to men who did not leave. Guardianship, Dawson said. For you. His eyes came back to Coraline. For us. The pen paused. That was the closest he had come to speaking what stood between them, unnamed and growing roots. Dawson, she said carefully. He looked down. I know what folks would say. Folks already say it. I know what you lost. She set the pen aside. Do you? He swallowed. The quiet stretched. I know I have no right to ask you to stand in another courthouse beside a man with a hard name and a harder face, he said. I know this house was empty enough to frighten a ghost. I know you had work in town and a room that was yours. I know children pull at wounds they don't mean to touch. That was more words than he usually spent in a week. Coraline's throat tightened. And what are you asking? He took off his hat, though they were indoors already, a nervous habit of manners. I don't know yet, he said, only that if the judge asks who those children belong with, I aim to say your name before mine. She had no answer for that. The midpoint came 5 nights later. Coraline found Abel awake after midnight, sitting by the kitchen door, with his boots on and Nellie's spoon in his hand. Where are you going? She whispered. His face crumpled, but he did not cry. If I go first, Silas won't come here. He always follows trouble. I can take work. Nellie can stay. Coraline knelt before him. You are 8 years old, near 9. You are not leaving your sister. I am leaving her. I'm saving her. The words struck too close to what Silas had said in town, and Coraline hated the way hunger taught children to mistake abandonment for sacrifice. Dawson appeared in the doorway, hair rumpled, suspenders loose over his shirt. He had heard. Abel clutched the spoon. Don't make me stay if it gets her taken. Dawson did not thunder. He did not command. He crossed the room, opened the front door, and stepped onto the porch. Come here, he said. Abel froze. Coraline started to object, but Dawson shook his head once. Abel went slowly. Coraline followed, wrapping her shawl tight against the night air. The prairie lay dark under a sky crowded with stars. The barn was a black shape. The repaired fence ran silver in the moonlight. Dawson pointed toward the north pasture. You see that cottonwood? Abel nodded. My line starts there, runs to the creek, bends west to the ridge, then south past the high meadow. I bought it acre by acre, nearly lost it twice, bled on most of it, cursed all of it. Abel looked confused. Dawson crouched so they were eye to eye. I promised you on my land that I would not let Nellie be sold. A man who breaks an oath on his land has no home left. You understand? Abel's lips parted. Dawson held out his hand, palm up. Give me the spoon. No, not to take. To swear proper. After a long moment, Abel placed the dented spoon in Dawson's palm. Dawson closed his fist around it. On my land and on your mama's spoon, he said. You do not have to run to keep your sister safe. Abel stared at him in the moonlight, trembling all over. Then Dawson added the simple sentence that stopped the loss. Stay, son. Abel broke. He stepped forward and hit Dawson's chest with both fists, not hard, just desperate, then clung to him with a sound that seemed torn from the bottom of his small body. Dawson held him awkwardly at first, then firmly. Coraline turned her face toward the stars and let her own tears fall where no child had to see. The next morning, Abel ate 2 biscuits and did not hide one. September came with gold grass, cool mornings, and fear in the walls. The courthouse in Bellwether was only 1 room above the jail, but to Abel it looked like a castle built to take children. He wore new boots. Dawson had stayed up late softening with oil so they would not blister. Nellie wore the green bonnet and clutched Dawson's mother's broushaw in one fist. Coraline carried the ledger, the receipt from Grady, the doctor's note, and 3 letters of support tied with string. Dawson wore his black coat. You look like a funeral, Hattie told him. I feel like one, then quit. Children smell dread. He looked at Abel and forced his shoulders down. Inside, Judge Faulkner sat behind a table. Ezra Grady was there. Tilda Morrow was there. Sheriff Pike, Reverend Miles, a few women from church, and Silas Bell, newly returned from Cheyenne with a railroad cap in his hand and a bruise yellowing along his cheek. Abel saw him grab Coraline's sleeve so hard the seam tore. Silas saw the children and looked away first. The hearing began with names, dates, debts, and the law's cold way of making human sorrow fit into square boxes. Grady testified that Dawson had paid the Bell account, voluntarily and perhaps rashly. Hattie testified that she had stayed at the Boone Ranch and seen more decent care than in half the houses calling themselves respectable. Reverend Miles spoke softly about duty. Sheriff Pike admitted he had failed to stop the sale before Dawson did. Then Tilda Morrow rose. "I do not question that Mrs. Sawyer has a tender heart," she said. "But tenderness is not the same as propriety. A widow living much of her time at a bachelor's ranch creates confusion. And Mr. Boone, while prosperous enough, is known for temper. The children need a proper family, with a mother and father under lawful arrangement." The judge looked over his spectacles. "Do you have such a family in mind?" Tilda lifted her chin. "My cousin in Hastings has no children. They might take the baby. The boy could be placed as farm help nearby." "No," Abel whispered. Coraline put a hand on his shoulder. Dawson's face went white with restraint. The judge turned to Silas. "You are the closest blood relation present. What is your petition?" Silas stood. He looked thinner than before, older too, as if Cheyenne had not fed him any mercy. "I want what's fair," he said. Dawson's hand curled. Silas glanced at him. "I heard there was money for keeping them." Judge Faulkner frowned. "There is no bounty for orphan children." Grady cleared his throat. "There might be property later. The Bell claims south of the creek, worth nothing but sand and wheeze." Hattie snapped. The judge tapped the table. "Order." Silas shifted. For a moment greed and shame wrestled on his face. Then Nellie made a little sound. Not a cry, just a sleepy murmur. Silas looked at her. Abel held his breath. Whatever he saw in the baby, it made his shoulders cave. "I can't take him," he said. "I couldn't then. I can't now." The room went quiet. Coraline's anger softened by 1 degree, not enough to forgive, but enough to see the ruin in him. The judge said, "Did you attempt to sell your siblings on the steps of Grady's mercantile?" Silas shut his eyes. "Yes." "Why?" His voice fell. "Because Ma died, and Nellie cried all night, and Abel kept asking what we'd eat, and I was scared. Because Mr. Grady said the debt would follow us. Because I am not made right, maybe." Abel stared at him. Silas opened his eyes and looked at Dawson. "I did wrong." Dawson said nothing. Then Silas looked at Coraline. "You keep her cheeks clean." Coraline's eyes stung. "Eyes. She used to get milk in the fold here." He touched his own neck beneath his chin. Ma laughed. Coraline nodded. Silas sat down hard. Judge Faulkner turned to Dawson. "Mr. Boone, what do you seek?" Dawson stood. The room seemed smaller with him upright. His anger was there, but bridled. Coraline could see the effort in the set of his shoulders, in the way he did not look at Tilda, Grady, or Silas too long. "I seek guardianship of Abel and Nellie Bell," he said, "with Coraline Sawyer named equal guardian, if she'll stand it." The judge's brows rose. "Mrs. Sawyer." Coraline stood too. "I will." "And what is your relation to Mr. Boone?" The question hung over every whisper the town had made. Dawson looked at Coraline, and she saw fear there, not of the judge, not of the county, but of putting weight on her wounded life. He spoke before pride could stop him. "I have asked nothing of Mrs. Sawyer, beyond what she freely chose. She owes me nothing. If this court requires a proper household, then I will provide one lawfully. But I will not use her name to win children and leave her dignity unpaid." Coraline felt the whole room watching. The judge said, "Are you proposing marriage as a legal convenience, Mr. Boone?" Dawson looked down at his hat. His voice roughened. "No, sir. I'm saying I love the home she has made of my house. I love the children because she taught me how to love without holding too tight. And I would marry her if no court, no county, and no gossip ever asked it of me." Coraline could not breathe for a moment. Dawson turned to her then. "But only if you want a life with a man still learning careful." It was not a grand speech. It was better than that. It was a man laying down his pride in public and not asking her to carry it for him. Coraline thought of Samuel's shoe in the trunk, Peter's grave, The empty room she had survived. The green calico torn for fever cloths. Abel's hand on her sleeve. Nellie's bread left uneaten and safe. Dawson's coffee with milk remembered by the third morning. She stepped closer. I do not need a perfect man, she said. I have no use for one. I need a table where children eat, a door that locks from inside, and someone who tells the truth even when his voice shakes. Dawson's eyes shone, though no tear fell. Anne, Hattie muttered from the back. A tiny laugh moved through the room. Coraline took Dawson's hand. His fingers closed around hers carefully, as if she were not fragile but precious. And I will marry Dawson Boone, she said, not to make a court comfortable, to make plain what has already become true. Abel whispered, does that mean we stay? Dawson looked at him. It means we fight too. Judge Faulkner removed his spectacles and rubbed the bridge of his nose. This county has made many things difficult that need not have been. I will not split these children. Temporary guardianship is granted to Dawson Boone and Coraline Sawyer jointly, pending their lawful marriage and a home inspection in 6 months. Mr. Silas Bell will have no custody unless this court rules otherwise. The Bell debt is extinguished. Grady opened his mouth. The judge looked at him. Entirely. Grady closed it. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Nellie dropped the silver spoon. It clattered across the floor and landed at Dawson's boot. He picked it up and gave it to Abel. Abel looked at the spoon, then at Dawson. You said son. Dawson nodded. In the night, I remember. Did you mean it? Dawson's throat worked. He placed one hand gently on Abel's head. Yes. Abel leaned against him in front of the whole county. That was what shocked Bellwether most. Not the money, not the marriage, not the judge's ruling. It was the sight of the angry, quiet cowboys standing still while a boy trusted him. Coraline and Dawson married 2 weeks later in the little church with Hattie, crying loudly and denying it to anyone who looked. Coraline wore her brown dress with new cuffs of green calico. Dawson wore the black coat, brushed clean. Abel stood beside him holding Nellie, who chewed the sugar spoon through most of the vows. When Reverend Miles asked if anyone objected, Hattie turned around in the pew and glared so fiercely that even the wind seemed to hush. No one spoke. Marriage did not turn Dawson soft overnight. He still scowled when the gate was left open. He still went quiet when sorrow came too near. He still had to step outside, sometimes when Abel spilled milk or Nellie shrieked at a slammed door, because anger rose faster than reason in him. But he came back. That was the difference. He came back and wiped the milk. He came back and closed the door gently 3 times to show Nellie the sound could be small. He came back and told Abel, I was sharp. You didn't earn it. Coraline changed too. She stopped folding all her anger into seams. One cold October morning, when Ezra Grady tried to charge her double for sugar, she set her basket on his counter and said, You have mistaken my quiet for permission. That ends today. 3 women behind her bought sugar elsewhere that week. By winter, the Boone Ranch had become a place people spoke of with wonder. Not because it grew rich all at once, but because it grew alive. Coraline organized a sewing circle that made quilts for families passing through hard seasons. And she ran it from Dawson's barn after he cleared the West Bay and built benches. Dawson grumbled about hens in my hay, then spent 2 nights making a long table for them. Abel started school. The first day, he tucked the silver spoon in his boot for courage. When another boy called him auction trash, Abel came home with a split lip and both fists bruised. Coraline washed his face. Dawson stood behind her, breathing hard. Did you start it? She asked. No. Did you finish it? Abel glanced at Dawson. Dawson said, Answer your mother. The word mother settled in the room like a log placed on a good fire. Abel looked at Coraline. I told him Nellie and trash. Then I hit him. Coraline pressed the cloth gently to his lip. Next time, tell the teacher first. Abel frowned. And if that don't work? Dawson handed him a biscuit. Then don't lead with your tomb tuck. You'll break it. Dawson, Coraline said. What? After the teacher, she tried not to smile and failed. Nellie learned to walk holding Judd's fur. The dog endured it with the expression of a saint under trial. Her first clear word was not Mama or Dawson or Abel. It was bread. She said it with such solemn demand at supper that Dawson laughed aloud. Everyone froze. Dawson Boone's laugh was rusty, surprised, and brief, but it filled the kitchen like sunlight through a clean window. Nellie laughed back, delighted by the noise he had made in him. That winter hit hard. Snow leaned against the doors. Cattle bawled in the white dark. Dawson and Abel worked side by side, breaking ice in the troughs, while Coraline kept the stove fed and the coffee hot. At night she mended socks by lamplight, while Dawson carved a small wooden horse for Nellie and pretended it was nothing. In January, Silas returned. He came at dusk, walking beside a lame horse, thinner than a fence rail. Dawson saw him first from the barn and reached for the rifle without thinking. Then he saw Abel at the window watching. Coraline put a hand on Dawson's arm. Careful. The word had become more than advice between them. It was a gate he had learned to close before the horses ran wild. Dawson left the rifle by the door and stepped onto the porch. Silas stopped at the yard fence. Snow dusted his shoulders. One eye was swollen. He held his cap in both hands. I ain't come to claim, he said before anyone spoke. Abel stood behind Coraline, rigid. Silas looked at him. I ain't come to take. Dawson's voice was cold. Then why? Silas swallowed. Work, my bay. Not here if you won't have me. I wanted to see if they lived. Nellie, now toddling, pushed past Coraline's skirt and stared at the stranger. She held the silver spoon in one hand and a crust of bread in the other. Silas' face broke. She's walking, he whispered. Abel stepped forward, trembling with fury and grief. You sold us. I did. You said we was wait. I did. You left. Silas nodded. Yes. Abel's voice cracked. I kept her warm. Silas looked at his little brother, and no excuse came. I know. Silence spread across the yard, deep as snow. Then Coraline did the thing no one expected. She opened the door wider. There is stew, she said. You can eat on the porch. Dawson looked at her sharply. She held his gaze. Not in the house. Not yet, Dawson understood. Mercy did not mean handing over the keys. Silas sat on the porch step and ate stew from a tin bowl with shaking hands. Abel watched from the doorway. Nellie pressed against his leg. When Silas finished, he set the bowl down and took a folded paper from his coat. I signed with a freight outfit east of Kearney, he said. They'll take me if I bring a character note. Dawson gave a hard breath. You want me to lie? No. Silas looked at Coraline. I want you to write that I came back and asked. That's all? Coraline studied him. And what will you do with wages? Silas stared at the porch boards. Send some for them, if you'll take it, Abel said. Nellie don't need your money. Coraline touched his shoulder. Maybe not, but a man needs a way to do right after doing wrong. Dawson's jaw flexed. He did not like it, but that night, after Silas slept in the barn under 2 horse blankets and Judge stationed himself outside the door, Dawson sat at the table while Coraline wrote the note. You're kinder than me, he said. No, she replied. I just know bitterness eats children first. He looked toward the room where Abel and Nellie slept. I'd have let him freeze once, I know, and now. She set down the pen. Dawson rubbed both hands over his face. Now I hate that he was hungry too. Coraline reached across the table and took his hand. That is not weakness. His fingers turned and held hers. By spring, the county's shock had changed shape. What folks first call scandal, they began calling work. The barn sewing circle became a relief kitchen after late blizzards killed calves and emptied pantries. Coraline kept lists. Dawson hauled flour, Hattie bullied donations from men twice her size. Abel delivered bundles in the wagon and refused to take praise, though he stood taller each time someone said, "Thank you." Nellie sat in a crate lined with a quilt, handing out biscuits and biting every third one to test its worth. Ezra Grady lost customers by the dozen after Caroline's ledger proved he had inflated debts for 3 widow households. At the county meeting, Dawson stood before men who had once feared his temper and laid the papers down without raising his voice. "This is what hunger costs when a storekeeper learns shame can be charged by the pound," he said. Grady sputtered. Tilda Morrow looked at the floor. Sheriff Pike backed the complaint. By summer, Bellwether had a new store cooperative run from the old grain office, with Caroline keeping accounts and Dawson building shelves after chores. That was what they built, not just a family, though that would have been miracle enough. They built a place where a widow could buy flour without signing away tomorrow, where a child could be fed before questions were asked, where old coats hung on pegs for anyone who needed one, where the county poor box was no longer hidden in the church office like a shameful thing, but set near the door with a sign Caroline painted herself. "Take what you need, leave what you can." Folks came from miles off. Some came proud and left humbled. Some came desperate and left with beans, cloth, or seed. Some came to stare at Dawson Boone, the angry quiet cowboy who had once paid $20 to stop a sin in the street and now stood behind a counter weighing coffee with Nellie on his hip. Judge Faulkner returned in June for the home inspection. He found curtains at the windows, hollyhocks rising along the fence, boots in various sizes by the door, a repaired rocker on the porch, and Abel reading aloud from the Bible while Nellie fed crumbs to Judge one by one. The judge walked through the house, looked at the pantry, checked the sleeping room, and asked Abel privately if he felt safe. Abel considered. "Doors locked from inside," he said. "There's always bread. Dawson don't leave when he's mad. Caroline sings when Nellie coughs. I got a caffeine button. I guess that's safe." The judge cleared his throat. "I guess it is." The permanent guardianship was signed that afternoon at the kitchen table. Dawson's hand shook when he wrote his name. Caroline placed Samuel's little shoe beside the ink bottle, not because grief had gone, but because it had been given a place among the living. Dawson saw it and touched the worn leather gently. "He would have liked Abel," he said. Caroline's eyes filled. He would have followed him everywhere. Abel, who had been pretending not to listen, looked at the shoe. "Can I know about him?" Caroline nodded. "Yeah, was he hungry?" The question pierced her, but softly. "No," she said. "Not for one day of his life." Abel seemed satisfied by that. Good. That evening, Silas' first money order arrived from Kearney, $3. Inside the envelope was one line, "For bread that stays." Abel read it twice. He did not forgive all at once. Children should not be asked to. But he folded the note and put it in the same box where Caroline kept the court paper and Dawson kept Grady's paid receipt. Years later, people in Bellwether would argue over when the Boone place became the heart of the county. Some said it was the day Dawson carried those children off the auction crate. Some said it was the day Caroline opened the cooperative ledger. Some said it was the winter they fed 37 families through snow deep enough to bury fence posts. But Abel always said it began on the night Dawson swore on land and spoon. And Nellie, when she grew old enough to tell it, said it began with bread left on the tray, still there in the morning. On the first anniversary of the day in front of Grady's Mercantile, Caroline made a supper finer than any holiday. Roast chicken, potatoes with cream, beans with salt pork, biscuits high and golden, and a small jar of peach preserves saved from Hattie's cellar. Dawson came in late from the pasture with Abel beside him, both of them muddy to the knee. Nellie stood on a chair at the window shouting, "Wash, wash," with great authority. The table had 4 chairs now, plus a high one Dawson had built from oak scraps. Curtains moved in the warm breeze. The hollyhocks outside had begun to bud. On the mantel, the Bible sat clean and used. Beside it, lay the dented silver spoon, polished bright in the bowl and worn dull on the handle where small fingers had held on through fear. Dawson paused in the doorway, looking at the table. Coraline noticed. "What is it?" He shook his head, but she had learned his silences. She crossed the kitchen and brushed dust from his sleeve. "Say less than you mean then." His eyes softened. "I was only thinking," he said. "The house sounds full." Nellie banged her spoon on the table. Abel complained that she always got the first biscuit. Judge barked once from underfoot. Hattie came through the door without knocking, carrying a pie and declaring the crust ruined before anyone could praise it. Coraline laughed, and Dawson Boone, who had once thought anger was the only thing strong enough to keep him standing, put his hand at the small of her back as if the whole world had narrowed to that warm kitchen, and the people inside it. Outside, the Nebraska prairie rolled wide under a sunset, the color of fire through honey. The repaired fence held. The garden leaned toward bloom. Coffee waited on the stove for after supper. And in the house that had once been too silent for even ghosts, 2 children slept easier every night. A woman's courage kept the cupboards open, and a quiet cowboy learned that love was not ownership, not rescue, not pride, but staying careful with what life had trusted to his hands.